Hi, I'm Starsky and welcome to From the Studio on Clubbing TV, and today I'm going to be taking a look at what is an all-time classic from the early 80s. It's the Sequential Circuits Pro 1. And at very first glance, you can tell this is a vintage machine. Just look at the size of it, look at the amount of space this takes up on the table. You know, it can fit almost my whole hand between these knobs here. And new synths, even large full-size synths, tend not to have this much space on the interface. You might have buttons for selecting patches, for example. You might have an LED, you might have a little screen. You don't get this much sort of blank space. And if you take a look inside this, you'll notice it's a big, empty space. And don't open my synths and take a peek inside as a general rule, but this one you sort of have to. I think anyone that's ever owned a Pro 1 has opened it up at some point or another, and that's because of its very dodgy keyboard, which essentially has little wires poking out the back of each of the keys, and then they touch a copper strip or this sort of copper bar, and when they touch it, it makes an electrical contact, and the length of that contact tells the synth what note to play. And what tends to happen, you get dirt or you get corrosion on those bars and those wires, and the connections aren't great, so you get what's called double triggering on this keyboard. So I'll try and do it now. There you go. And this morning, when I first set this up, almost every key was doing it, so I had to strip it down and clean it. And now it's not so bad. Should have spent more time on that one, really. So we've established it's old and temperamental. Let's have a tour of it, and we'll start off by looking at the oscillators. It's just got two simple oscillators. Oscillator A can be a sawtooth or a square, and you can change the width of that square using the pulse width knob here. It's got oscillator B, and that's also got a triangle as well. And you can change the pulse width of the pulse on B as well. And what's interesting on this is that you can have the sawtooth and the square playing at the same time. So let's put oscillator A on its own. Nothing's coming out because nothing's switched in. Let's switch in the sawtooth. So there's a nice, really crisp, fat sounding sawtooth. And then we've got the square. Put both together. So lots of tones you can get out of that. Oscillator B has got a sawtooth, a triangle and a square, and you can have all of those on at the same time. And you can tune each of the oscillators independently using these knobs here. Some synths like the Sub 37, for example, oscillator 2 is dependent on the tuning of oscillator 1. So you have a detune knob, not completely independent tuning. So change the octaves. And all those lovely weird little clicks. You know you're playing with real old electronics in that. So oscillator A and oscillator B are different to each other. Oscillator A has got a sync, so it syncs to oscillator B. Without showing you graphs and stuff, this is what it does. And if I take sync off, it's always on the same note, but just changing the tone. And the note it's picking is what I've got on oscillator B. If I bring B in, they're both completely out of tune with each other. But put the sync on again. And that's what you heard in the intro track, using oscillator sync, but modulating the pitch of oscillator A every time a note's played. It's actually a really nice way of building tension and slightly changing the tone of a line over the course of a track. If I put the arpeggiator on here, I'm moving over to oscillator B's special trick. It's got this low frequency mode. Click into low frequency mode and play a square. You can hear that click, and that's effectively making it into a second LFO. But even without the sync and the low frequency mode, just the raw sound of these oscillators is fabulous. So I think that sort of brings us to the end of the oscillators. And as I've started playing with the filter, let's have a little listen to that, shall we? It's got a single 24 dB low pass resonant filter. So what does all that mean? It means that it's low pass, so low frequencies can pass through and it drops out the high ones. It's 24 dB, which means it drops quite a lot out. You can get 12 dB and 18 dB filters as well, which aren't quite as aggressive. And it's resonant, which means at the cutoff frequency where you start dropping the frequencies out, you can have a little peak. So that note that you can hear there, that's the filter. And if you take the oscillators out, you're just listening to the filter there, which means it self-oscillates. And when it self-oscillates, it means that you can play it if you can track the actual frequency that you're playing across the keyboard. So that's what this knob here does. It takes a little bit of playing around with to get it so that it does an octave over an octave. And that gives us those really old school famous organ sounds. And what you've got there is you've effectively got three oscillators playing. You've got the filter, oscillator A, and oscillator B. And you can detune them with each other to make some interesting chords. We've looked at the cutoff, the resonance and the keyboard amount, but we've also got this envelope amount knob here, and that allows us to modulate the cutoff frequency with this ADSR envelope here. So let's add a bit of envelope and turn the cutoff down. Stick a reverb or a delay on that and you start creating some nice big ambiances. And I'm going to use this Moog Moga delay pedal to do that. Primarily because it sort of looks the same because it's got black interior with wooden paneling, but also because it's absolutely amazing sounding. Gorgeous that, isn't it? And while we've got that plugged in, let's take a look at the modulation section, because the modulation sort of clangs and stuff you can get, and putting them through a delay or a reverb again, they sound absolutely fabulous. So up next is the modulation section. So here we've got three sources. We've got the filter envelope, oscillator B and the LFO, and we've got five destinations: oscillator A frequency, that's that one, oscillator A pulse width, oscillator B frequency, and oscillator B pulse width, and also the filter as well. So that first sound you hear, that sort of Daft Punk rip-off sound, was using the filter envelope, that's this here, to modulate oscillator A. So with the sync off, you can hear the tuning of oscillator A changing. And put sync on. It's just changing those harmonics at the start. Really nice effect. Let's try something else then, shall we? Let's modulate oscillator A with oscillator B, but let's take it off the low frequency mode and have it on sort of normal audio rates. So we'll turn oscillator B down and oscillator A up. And now we'll turn up oscillator B modulation amount. So all sorts of weird goodness you can get from that. So we're getting some really nice, thick, rich tones out of this, aren't we? We're getting those sort of nice harmonics you get with the sync, and we're getting those strange harmonics that you're getting with the frequency modulation. So finally, let's take a look at this little section down here with the sequencer and the arpeggiator. You can only store 2 really basic patterns on this. There's 16 steps, there's no ties, there's no rests, you can't change the note length, or the gate length I should say. You just get 16 notes, program them in and play them back. That's it. So let's try and do that, shall we? I think we all know what that is, don't we? And then we go to play. That's simple. And then you can play that up and down the keyboard as well, so. So it's a really fat, great sounding synth, but is it for you? Although it's got a great tone, sounds fantastic, and it's a really famous synth, it's really temperamental. And as you saw at the start of this, I had to pull this apart to get it working today. So it's really temperamental, it's not reliable. If it's your one and only synth, I really actually wouldn't recommend it. You've got no MIDI in or MIDI out, no connectability, although it has got CV in and CV out, so you can use a box. Sort of MIDI to CV converter. I've got this thing here that I can use it with. Really handy, but again, another couple of £100 that you're spending. So it takes the price of this. I think they're well over €1,000 these days. I've seen them for 1,500, 1,400, 1,600. So adding in a converter as well, you know, you're getting near €2,000, which is an awful lot of money for a very old synth that could break on you at any minute. I've got a little problem with this one. When I switch this on, it goes out of tune. So if you want a hardware version of a Pro 1, Behringer's Pro 1's pretty good. I would recommend, for the hardware, get the Behringer. But also there's a software version that Yuhi make, the Yuhi Repro 1 and Repro 5 they're called, and that's spectacularly good as well. So software, Yuhi, hardware, Behringer, but if you really want a vintage synth, you know, you can't beat this. It is a really, really nice bit of kit. And I did think I was going to get rid of this and keep the Behringer, and I just couldn't face it. I couldn't face getting rid of it. It's such a nice thing to have, but you need a lot of space and you need a lot of cash. Well, I hope you enjoyed that, and if you did, you can watch this whenever you like on Clubbing TV's YouTube channel on our From the Studio playlist. And if you've got any questions, throw them in the comments and I'll see what I can do to answer them. And if you are thinking of buying one, or you're wondering, do you get the software, do you get the Behringer, or do you get this? I've done some comparisons on my Starsky Carr YouTube channel that you might find interesting. Anyway, I'll see you in the next episode of From the Studio.